Number 10. Made of stone. This one disturbs me so much and it's terrifying that it hasn't been solved yet. If you're a Game of Thrones fan, which hopefully you are, you've heard of grayscale, the disease that like poor Shireen Baratheon suffered in the series. Yeah, you know what I mean? Well, it may have been inspired by something that actually exists. Though there is a 1 in 2 million chance of getting it, it does happen. What is it exactly? Stoneman syndrome is a condition where the ligaments, tendons, muscles all slowly turn into bone. It starts with a stiffness in the neck and shoulders and then gradually moves down the body. Imagine having 2 different skeletons in your body. That's kind of what it is. What's even more heartbreaking about this mysterious disease is that you can't remove it. In fact, any attempt to remove the bone makes it grow faster and come back stronger. I hope they come up with a cure as soon as possible, as currently there isn't one, as to why it's a medical mystery. But because it's so rare, it makes it even that much harder to cure it because they don't have that much on file. Anyways, let's keep going. Number 9. Cyanomelia. I pretended I was a mermaid countless times as a kid, and still do every time I do a dolphin kick in the water because I'm like, I'm a mermaid. But I kinda don't want to be, and I'm kinda glad I'm not because of this. Cyanomelia is the condition in which a child is born with their legs fused together in a way that makes them look like a mermaid. Sadly, it doesn't have a happy ending, as most children born with this defect don't live very long. The 2 most famous cases are that of Tiffany Yorks, who was the oldest living survivor, living to the age of 27, and Shiloh Pepin. Patients of this condition barely survive the womb or the first few years of life due to organ issues that follow the disease. The exact cause of cyanomelia remains unknown to this day, as it appears to be a random occurrence and there's no way of predicting it. Number 8. Morgellons disease. This next one is a more controversial disease. Morgellons disease is an unexplained condition where a patient believes that there is something crawling beneath their skin. As a result, scabs and irritation erupt from persistent scratching, along with small fibers. It is controversial because the research done on the condition has yielded conflicting results. Some doctors think it is a result of a delusional infestation, while others believe it is an infectious process in the skin cells. The Center for Disease Control yielded a study that concluded it isn't caused by an infection. However, multiple studies have reported a possible link between Morgellons and another bacterial infection. To this day though, there is still no proven treatment or confirmed understanding of the disease, so for now it remains a medical mystery.
In our number 7 spot today, we have the facial expressions experiment. In 1924, a psychologist with the University of Minnesota, Carney Landis, wanted to conduct an experiment to study facial expressions. More specifically, he wanted to see if everyone's expressions of emotions were the same. Does happiness look the same on everyone? Does sadness, shock, disgust, etc. make us all react the same way facially? An interesting question for sure, but the method was strange. Basically, he recruited some student volunteers and then painted the lines of their facial muscles black. He then exposed each participant to different stimuli in order to photograph their reactions and then of course compare the results. This is all fine, except for what the stimuli actually contained. I guess this guy just really wanted big reactions because he included showing them adult films, exposing them to ammonia, making them touch reptiles, and even beheading rats. Apparently 1/3 of the participants willingly did this beheading when told, despite not knowing how to do it humanely, and even if they did know how to do it humanely, why would you? And for the 2/3 that were regular and did not just behead a rat because a strange man told them to, unfortunately Carney did it for them. I'm not even sure what the results of this experiment were, and I have to ask, does it even matter? What an actual nightmare for something that largely just doesn't really have an impact on our lives. In our number 6 spot today, we have telephone cats. Sorry to all the cat people out there, this one isn't going to be for you. In 1929, 2 scientists at Princeton University wanted to conduct an experiment in order to test how auditory nerves perceive sounds. This is obviously extremely important research, but the way they went about it is very messed up. They took a sedated but alive cat and cut out part of its brain. They then attached one end of a telephone wire to the cat's auditory nerve and the other end to a receiver. When one of these scientists spoke into the cat's ear, the other one could hear it on the other end. This is cool, but most definitely not an excuse to do something so inhumane. There were benefits of this experiment, of course, and it is believed that it may have helped helped lead to the development of cochlear implants, which is of course an incredibly important scientific advancement. The worst part, however, while the cat actually survived this experiment, instead of treating it like a king for the rest of its life like it truly deserved, these scientists instead killed it to see if the experiment would still work on a dead cat. It didn't. In our number 5 spot today, we have the pit of despair. This experiment was conducted by Henry Harlow and is one of the most controversial on this list. In a sort of mental health study, Henry decided to induce depression in monkeys. He took very young monkeys and separated them from their peers and mothers and put them into isolation in a cage that was called the pit of despair. Sometimes the monkeys would stay there for longer, more extended periods, and other times they would be repeatedly separated and put into the cage for multiple shorter stays. These monkeys all proved to be extremely psychologically disturbed after the conclusion of this experiment, which should have seemed kind of obvious even before the experiment was conducted. These monkeys were used as a model of human clinical depression, but here's where things get even sadder than they already were. These monkeys were unable to be treated and rehabilitated. Despite various forms of treatment, they were just unable to get to a place they would have been had they not have been subject to a cruel experiment. In our number 4 spot today, we have psychic driving. A part of Project MKUltra, this experiment was conducted by British psychiatrist Donald Ewan Cameron, who created the psychic driving concept that the CIA found interesting. Basically, psychic driving was a procedure that subjects patients to a continuous repeated audio loop of something that is intended to change their behavior. Basically, the patients would be exposed to hundreds of thousands of repetitions of a singular statement through the course of their treatment, and they would also be subjected to paralytic drugs that would subdue them while being exposed to this looped message. Yeah, so the CIA heard about this idea for a treatment and thought, that sounds cool. Then they started sending money to fund Cameron's experiments, but he actually didn't know it was coming from the CIA because they used a front. So Cameron's psychic driving experiments for MKUltra began to take place in Canada. I guess they said that the aim of the experiments were to get rid of or cure someone of schizophrenia by erasing existing memories and reprogramming the psyche. I'm not sure that's how schizophrenia works, but I guess they did. Cameron would subject patients to paralytic drugs and electroconvulsive therapy that was 30 to 40 times the normal power. He would also put the experiment subjects into induced comas while exposing them to the repeated audio. The experiments were mostly conducted on patients who entered the institute from more common problems like anxiety disorders or postpartum depression, and they ended up leaving with permanent effects from his actions. These included things like urinary incontinence, amnesia, being unable to speak. Some people forgot their parents and thought that the interrogators were their parents. It clearly completely altered those who were participating in these horrible and certainly unethical experiments.
Number 3. The girl who cries stone. From a magic spell to a witch's curse, this little girl from Yemen shocked doctors and mystics with her strange ability. Sadia started literally crying stones since she was 8 years old, and no one can sort out why. Her father was desperate to find a treatment, and despite many x-rays in local clinics, nothing out of the ordinary was spotted. Most of the stones came out in the afternoon, weirdly enough, and she can produce as many as 100 in a single day. Thankfully, they do not hurt her, and for the most part, her life is normal. Since her case, one other woman in Bajal experienced similar symptoms, except this time they were accompanied by bouts of unconsciousness and a swollen abdomen. She has since been treated and recovered fully, but as to what is wrong with Sadia, no one is quite sure. Number 2. Brooke Greenberg. Sadly, Brooke passed away at the young age of 20 before she ever found the explanation for her condition. However, there is a chance that she might never have been aware of it. Brooke's body refused to age, and at the time of her death, she had never learned to speak and had the mental capacity of a toddler and remained the size of a baby. As an actual baby, her survival was considered a miracle in itself, as she endured a stroke and several stomach ulcers. She also mysteriously had a brain tumor that put her into a deep sleep for 2 weeks. Then it disappeared and she woke up. Kinda weird, right? By age 16, she hadn't lost her baby teeth, though her bones had appeared to have aged, just not grown. Her case was enough to bring retired medical expert Richard F. Walker back to the field. In fact, he has made it his life's work to uncover what caused her condition. Her case has since been labeled Syndrome X, and he continues to study similar patients. He believes that if they solve it, they will not only help these people, but perhaps discover the key to the fountain of youth. And last but not least, a superhuman memory. If I were to have a superpower, I would either want teleportation or superhuman intelligence. I think about that every single day. So the mysterious condition that Jill Price has me like green with envy. God, oh, what I would do, the books I would read. Jill can name every single detail of every day she's ever lived. Give her a date and she could tell you everything she did with ease, from like how many stirs she stirred her coffee with to like what she read that morning, every single thing. Her condition is called HSAM, highly autobiographical memory, and why people like her seem to have this superhuman ability is a complete mystery. Brain images have depicted differences in the structure of their brains to muggles like us, but it can't be confirmed as to whether it is these brain differences that cause the condition. Oh man, but if they could patent that into like a super juice or a kind of coffee, I'd be so happy. I'd be just very, very excited about that, because good God, dreams to life, you know what I mean? Number 10, Hutchinson-Gilford progeria. HGPS is one of the rarest conditions in the world. It is a condition where the body dramatically and rapidly ages beginning as early as childhood. So it's kind of like Benjamin Button except backwards. Most of the time you can't tell at birth, as they usually look normal, but as they age and grow they do not gain weight. Their facial characteristics also become thinner and fragile looking, their eyes and ears protrude, and their features like their nose and lips become thin and beak-like. The condition also causes alopecia, which is hair loss, and they lose their fat beneath their skin. However, intellectual development is uninhibited and their motor skills don't suffer either, so they're literally just trapped inside this body. But sadly, the condition does not have a very long life expectancy, as they often suffer heart attacks and strokes at a very young age. There are approximately 100 documented cases where patients lived into their 20s. Currently, the cure remains a mystery. Number 9, allergic to the cold. What? I mean, I don't like the cold, but to clarify, not a cold, but the cold. Entirely opposite to another case on this list, there are actually people in this world that are allergic to the cold. Right? Then that's not just like them like shivering in the wind. Like, I don't mean that, and I don't mean your aunt who flies to Florida for Christmas. I'm talking about breaking out in rashes. The condition is called cold urticaria. Even slight exposure can result in a welt, and jumping into cold water could result in a full anaphylactic shock. Imagine how much of a problem this is. Like, the cure still eludes doctors, but they may actually know the reason. Dr. Gerald Gleisch at the University of Utah studies patients with the condition. He says that it appears to be due to an antibody called immunoglobulin E. This antibody causes the inappropriate immune reaction, and it may hold in store the cure. So far, only antihistamines work a little bit, but it still remains a boggling mystery as to how things could go this wrong. You know? Very, very strange. Number 8, Kuru. I'm not gonna lie to you, I was debating putting this one on the list because it has an explanation, as some of them do on this list, but it still has no cure. Sort of. Kuru is a very strange, fatal brain disease similar to mad cow. Proteins called prions cause a buildup of abnormal brain tissue. This causes irreversible brain damage, and there's just no going back. It's 100% lethal. It was first discovered in a remote region of New Guinea by a tribe that practiced consuming human flesh. Their belief was that it preserved the spirits of the dead. This little fact brings me to my next point, that Kuru can only be contracted through the consumption of human brains. The tradition to consume human bodies is now outlawed, so there have been significantly less cases. However, there remains no cure to the disease besides, like, you know, not having human brains for Sunday dinner. Number 7, Landon Jones. It is rare for anyone to be able to resist the French fry. Everyone has that friend that says, no, I don't want McDonald's, like I don't want any. And then you order some and they always are just like, are your French fries? And you're like, get out of here, those are mine. Anyways, that would be me. Well, Landon Jones may be the only person who would be able to resist. On October 14th, 2013, the preteen Landon Jones woke up with a bacterial infection in his left lung, which was treated successfully, or so they thought. Landon lost his appetite entirely. This boy is literally never hungry. His parents have to bargain with him to eat, but unfortunately he keeps losing weight. After visiting specialist after specialist, the only thing doctors have been able to determine is that Landon may be the only one of his kind, which doesn't make it very helpful. There are no other cases like this in the world. Landon did start having absent seizures 3 years prior, which could provide some hint as to what is going on. The leading explanation is that it is a rare condition that affects the hypothalamus, the tiny area of the brain that controls hunger, thirst, blood pressure, and sleep. I wasn't able to find any recent articles referring to his progress now, but I hope, Landon, that wherever you are, that you are doing much better. Number 6, a water allergy. A human being can only survive without water for around 3 days, so this medical condition is definitely surprising. How can we be allergic to something we need to survive? The condition, while still a mystery, has a name: aquagenic urticaria, and affects less than 100 people across the world. Whenever someone with this condition comes in contact with water, they break out in hives and rashes that last around an hour, and researchers have no idea what the underlying cause is. The leading theory is that it is caused by allergens in the water, so patients are encouraged to drink purified water or bathe in purified water as well. But beyond that, they have no clue. Due to the rarity of the condition, there is very little data to study, but I think we can all be grateful it isn't common either. Number 5, Mandy Sellers. When Mandy was born, she appeared to be a healthy child until she started growing. Despite having a very lean frame, Mandy's legs alone weigh 200 pounds, 5 times the normal size. She was a medical mystery doctors had no idea how to solve. The only way they could foresee stopping the growth of her legs was amputation. This procedure eventually happened in 2010 when she developed an infection. Even stranger though, this didn't stop the condition at all, as the leg started growing back. Imagine how frustrating that would be. Fortunately though, according to Mandy's website, she was able to go on an experimental new drug that helped to shrink her legs. Then finally, after years of suffering, she was able to be officially diagnosed. Mandy's condition is the result of a mutation of the PIK3CA gene, the only one of its kind, something she's pretty proud of. Still, doctors have yet to come up with a more effective treatment. As of 2019, she is still waiting for a new drug trial, and her legs appear to be kind of plateauing, so who knows where she's at now, but Mandy, I hope you're doing better. Number 4, spontaneous accent. What do you mean? Nobody does that on this channel. Anyways, shut up, Rachel. God. Imagine waking up one morning and finally having the accent you've always wanted. I'm sure there is someone out there who wishes for that. But Rosemary Dorr wasn't one of them. Southern Ontario-based Rosemary Dorr immediately rushed to the hospital in 2006 after sensing signs of a stroke. She ended up spending most of that summer in post-stroke care, but what was very strange was her recovery. Rosemary took on an entirely new accent. Her Southern Ontario dialect became that of Newfoundland, and if you live in Canada, you know how different those accents are. She couldn't shake it. Rosemary was suffering from a real condition called foreign accent syndrome. It's a thing! Only 60 other cases have ever been confirmed worldwide. The first known was a Norwegian woman during World War II who started speaking with a German accent after a head injury. Very, very poor timing. The exact cause is still unknown, but you know, hopefully Rosemary's learned to live with that. It's a pretty fun accent. Number 3, Parry's Romberg syndrome. Another unbelievably rare and terrifying disorder where the skin and soft tissues of half of the face atrophy. It usually occurs in the left half of the face and is more common in women than in men. The deterioration begins above the upper jaw, between the nose and the upper lip, then to the eye, ear, and neck areas. This process may also affect the gums and roof of the mouth. So essentially, the left side of your face caves in on itself and ages 80 years. Hair on that side turns white and falls out. This entire process takes place over a 2 to 10 year period before it finally stabilizes. Sometimes it hinders vision, other times the effects are just cosmetic, but still a frustrating process for the patients going through it. On top of that, there is no cure and there are no current treatments to stop the deterioration. So far, the only option is surgical intervention with reconstructive procedures. Number 2, RPI deficiency. Introducing the second rarest disease in the world, fitting for number 2, with only 4 known cases ever historically diagnosed. White matter is made up of tissue that includes nerve fibers that connect nerve cells. So, needless to say, one of the most important parts of the brain. RPI deficiency patients have diffuse white matter abnormalities, which causes psychomotor regression, developmental delays, along with seizures, poor vision, and slow emotional and physical reflexes. Scientists are working tirelessly to find a way to cure it, but you might be thinking, if it's so rare, why are we so stressed about it? Well, you might think that with your perfectly healthy brain, but to the next potential patient, a cure could mean the world. Well, actually, no, it will mean the world. Though doctors have been able to figure out the cause, the cure still remains unsolved. Number 1. Field's disease. Field's disease was named after a pair of twins in Wales, Catherine and Christy, who were the first to be diagnosed with the disease, and they're the only ones. In total, there have only been 2 diagnosed cases of the disease in history, which makes it like the rarest in the world. What is it exactly? Field's disease is a neuromuscular disease that affects the voluntary movement of muscles. Due to the rarity of the case, information is very limited. Doctors first noticed it when the girls were about 4 years old, and by the time they turned 9 they could barely walk. By age 11 they couldn't eat or write by themselves, and by 14 they lost the ability to speak. So as you can see, the degeneration is quite rapid. Alongside losing their ability to move and function, Catherine and Christy also experienced over 100 painful muscle spasms daily. The doctors did numerous tests to rule out other conditions, but still they have no idea what is causing the disease. Nor, of course, is there a cure. While they work to find one, the best they can do is make sure the girls are comfortable to the best of their ability. Otherwise, Field's disease remains a mystery, but hopefully not for much longer.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Bobby, Eddie, and David. When Bobby Shafran was 19 years old, he found out he had a twin, a brother named Eddie. The two were raised separately because they had been adopted at birth into different households. Not too long after finding out about each other, things took an even crazier twist when Bobby and Eddie found out that they had a triplet, another brother named David. What should have been a very joyous reunion for the triplets turned very dark when they began to uncover the truth about what happened and why they had spent all of those years not knowing the others existed. As it turns out, they found out they were forced to be subjects of an experiment they had no idea was taking place. Peter Neubauer was a child psychiatrist who wanted to study nature versus nurture, but decided to do it in this cruel and unethical way. He believed that twins or triplets had a better chance of thriving if they were separated from their twin, and he wanted to prove this by unknowingly separating twins from each other at birth. Luckily, Bobby, Eddie, and David all found each other, and their story is documented in the movie 3 Identical Strangers. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Milgram Experiment. The premise of this experiment was that they took 2 groups of people, one called teachers and one called learners, and they paired them up, one from each group. The pair couldn't see each other, but the teacher would ask the learner a question. If the learner got it wrong, the teacher was then told to give them an electric shock. Every question made the shocks get worse until an eventual fatal shock would be administered. Before the experiment, it was proposed that only 3% of the participants would go all of the way and actually give the fatal shock. But it turned out that under pressure, 65% of the teachers actually gave the lethal dose of electricity to their learner counterparts. Luckily, the students were actually just actors, so no one was truly getting hurt or shocked to death in this experiment, but it honestly is very creepy and very disturbing to see these poor people being pushed so far past their boundaries, and it's kind of unsettling to know the results. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Hoffling Hospital Experiment. This experiment happened all the way back in 1966, in a time where the rules of psychological experiments were a lot more loosey-goosey. Because of this, the nurses that were all a part of this experiment had no idea that they were participants, which nowadays is very illegal. Basically, this experiment took place on the night shift. The night nurse would receive a phone call during the shift, and on the other end would be Dr. Smith, who's actually a researcher. He would ask the nurses to check the medicine cabinet to see if they had a drug called Astrotin, which was actually a drug that was just made up for this experiment, and it was just a placebo. The Astrotin would clearly state the maximum dosage of 10 milligrams, but Dr. Smith would ask the nurses to administer 20 milligrams. They were told that the doctor was in a hurry and he would sign all of the authorization papers as soon as he came in to see the patient later on that night. If the nurse decided to give the patient the drug, they would be breaking 3 rules. They are not allowed to accept instructions over the phone, the dose was double the maximum limit stated on the box, and the medicine itself was unauthorized. It was not on the ward stock list, so it shouldn't be in use at the hospital. Out of the 22 unknowing nurse participants, 21 of them administered the drug. That's insane. This isn't to say that the nurses were bad people or that they were bad at their job, but this experiment combined with the interviews that happened afterwards just showed how the power imbalance and the social pressures that come along with that can affect the outcome of a workplace extremely drastically, and in this case it really could have been a matter of life and death.
Number 7. Microcephaly. Microcephaly is a birth defect that affects every 1 in 800 to 5,000 babies born. There is no way to predict the condition unless diagnosed in the 3rd trimester via ultrasound, but even by then, it's already too late. Even with that, the cause and treatment of the condition still remains unknown. Microcephaly is a condition in which a child's head doesn't form properly, being a few times smaller than it should be. In the womb, a baby's head grows because the brain grows. So if the brain doesn't grow, then neither does the head. Severe cases where the head is even smaller could have resulted from injury in the womb. Accompanying conditions are seizures, developmental delay, movement and balance issues, hearing loss, difficulty swallowing, and vision problems. The list of theories as to how it happens is pretty long, from genetic shifts to accidents, malnutrition, alcohol, and more, but it remains a lifelong condition with no set protocols or practices as to how to treat it, even beyond a cure. So doctors still remain baffled and there's no way of preventing it. Number 6. Tree Man Syndrome. Epidermodysplasia vericiformis. That is the actual scientific name. In a previous video we talked about Stone Man Syndrome. Well, this next one turns you into a living human tree. Kind of. It is shocking to look at and almost looks too remarkable to be true, but sadly it is. EV is a rare inherited form of HPV, the human papillomavirus. It causes a chronic infection of bark-like growths on the skin, and they just get insane. They usually develop on the hands and feet, but have been known to develop on the face in severe cases. Currently, there are no effective treatments besides removing the warts, but nothing can stop them from growing. A man in Jerusalem hadn't been able to use his hands for years until a doctor was finally able to successfully surgically remove them, but still, there is no cure for halting the process altogether, but hopefully the cure will follow the same one, that is for HPV, which is hopefully closer than we think it is. Number 5. The boy who never slept. Putting your child down for a nap is probably one of the most relieving parts as a parent. Yes, parenthood is a joy, but it's damn exhausting. I do not know how my mom and dad did it, honestly. But imagine having a 4-year-old who never slept. Ever. That's exactly what happened to Rhett Lamb, a young boy who boggled scientists. The mother was sure something was wrong as soon as he was born, and after realizing she wasn't just an anxious mom, theories started flying. After multiple tireless testing, finally they had an answer to the mystery. So yes, technically it's solved. I know that, but it was still a mystery and it was unsolved for a period of time. Sue me. It's really interesting. Rhett had an extremely rare condition called Chiari malformation, meaning the brain was literally being squeezed into the upper part of the spine. After undergoing surgery to remove the bone around his spinal column, doctors expected the results to set in a year later. There was a 50-50 chance that his sleep was going to improve, and it did! So I know. Okay, but this was like an episode of House. It starts out a mystery and then they solve it. Number 4. Wim Hof, aka the Iceman. Anyone who has experienced a Canadian winter wishes they had this guy's problem. Though it doesn't really sound like a problem at all, but definitely a mystery. Wim Hof isn't bothered by the cold. That's right, the cold never bothered him anyway. Over 30 years ago, Wim Hof from the Netherlands was going for a walk when he had the overwhelming impulse to see if he could swim in icy water and how it was. It made him feel so good that he's done it every day since. He has since been called the Iceman, his ability to withstand the cold superhuman. In January 1999, he traveled to the Arctic Circle to run a half marathon in his bare feet. 3 years later, he earned the Guinness Book of World Record for the longest amount of time under the ice, twice the length of an Olympic pool. Insane. He even climbed Mount Kilimanjaro in shorts. When Dr. Ken Kaemler heard of his case, he immediately began to study him. Kaemler had treated dozens of people who tried and failed to climb Mount Kilimanjaro due to the extreme cold. The only explanation he's uncovered is that it must be something to do with his mindset, or the wiring in his brain. This man defies science in ways that no one quite understands. And if you want to learn more, you can check out his website.
In our number 3 spot today, we have the UCLA schizophrenia experiments. Starting in 1983, UCLA researchers Michael Gitlin and Keith Nocherlin went to great and very unethical lengths to see just how people who were suffering from schizophrenia relapse. Basically, they were trying to figure out if there was a way to predict the relapse or a psychosis episode. And this is definitely important work that deserves attention because it could certainly have real-world benefits, but that does not mean unethical lengths should be reached. Unfortunately, this experiment involved recruiting hundreds of participants who were all being treated for schizophrenia and then taking them off of their medication. This alone has some obvious implications for the health of these people, but to make matters worse, there was no suitable plan in place for when they could return to their medication, and they also just didn't do a good enough job making sure that those participating were protected and safe given their very vulnerable state. Unfortunately, the results were disastrous and proved to be fatal when one of the participants, Antonio La Madrid, ended up taking his own life. In an article from 1994, it also says that the doctors failed to get proper informed consent from the patients as well. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Tuskegee Experiment. In the years between 1932 and 1972, there were 399 black impoverished farmers in Tuskegee, Alabama, who all had syphilis, who were recruited to participate in a free program. They were told that the program would help them treat their ailment, but of course that never happened. This experiment was conducted by people who were trying to see what would happen if the disease went untreated. Instead of treating the men with penicillin, which was the recommended treatment at the time, the men received aspirin and mineral supplements as placebos. And while this experiment was conducted to try and understand what effect the spread of disease has on the body, the unethical considerations of the scientists who conducted it proved to be absolutely fatal and just downright cruel. Out of the 399, 28 of them passed away from the disease directly, 10 passed away from complications related to the disease, 40 spouses became infected, which was then passed on to 19 others at birth whose parents had been infected. This whole situation truly is one of those times where you stop and wonder how these things were ever treated as acceptable, and really just hope that things have changed for the better. In our number 1 spot today, we have Unit 731. The Imperial Japanese Army's Unit 731 conducted some pretty horrifying experiments during World War II that certainly are shocking to anyone who hears about them. The experiments were meant to be done as a way to prepare for biological warfare, but the process was gruesome and just inhumane. Different medical schools and universities provided doctors and other research staff to help conduct these experiments, and they used both prisoners and civilians as the guinea pigs. There were a bunch of different experiments that were conducted during this time, some of which involved injecting them with pathogens such as plague or cholera or anthrax. Others involved vivisection or operations with no anesthesia, putting them in a pressure chamber to see how much a human can withstand before bursting, or even live weapons testing. It is hard to even believe that this was a real thing that happened, and we honestly can't even begin to imagine what those people were forced to face during that time. Alright guys, that has been our list for today. Thanks so much for checking it out. I've been your host today, Olivia Kozlowski, and I'll see you again soon. Goodbye!